So, for many years now, conducting high-quality headphone measurements has had a massive barrier to entry. Industry-standard measurement rigs are extremely expensive. A full Gross rig will run you upwards of $10,000, and a B&K system on the new industry standard costs around $50,000. And because of this, many headphone reviewers and hobbyists out there flock to the infamous clone rigs found on AliExpress, which have their issues, or worse, the dreaded MiniDSP ears. In fact, the ears has been a source of deep frustration for those of us doing this kind of work. Not because it's bad, and it is bad, but because the people using it far too frequently fail to understand its limitations and regularly misuse it. Hell, I've seen headphone reviewers try to display data captured on the ears against targets devised on industry standard headphone measurement equipment. There is so much wrong with this. The big problem with this is that the MiniDSP ears contributes a massive amount of noise and scrungle to an already difficult to understand landscape of headphone measurements where people new to the hobby are likely to be misled. In short, that system is hot garbage, at least for measuring headphones as an evaluative tool, despite regularly getting used for that purpose. And I say this having also owned one of these rigs many years ago. I never used it in the way that I see people using it today, but mistakes were made. But now, they've come out with the MiniDSP Ears Pro. And as we all know, with all things that are pro, that means it's better. I look forward to the MiniDSP Ears Pro Max Plus. No, really, this is genuinely orders of magnitude better than the original ears. They shouldn't even be in the same conversation. But let's get into what this is and figure out if it actually does bring high quality headphone measurements to the masses. And stick with me because I'll be joined later in the video by His Royal Chadness Oratory 1990 to talk about it. Okay, as usual, all these videos are made possible by Headphones.com. If you find anything that we've said here valuable to you or interesting in any way, consider giving Headphones.com a visit and tell them we sent you. And I just want to note the Ears Pro here was sent to us to check out by MiniDSP. They didn't pay us. They don't even know that we're doing this video, but I felt like letting you guys know where this unit is from. Okay, so first, what sets the Ears Pro apart from the ears? So the MiniDSP Ears Pro is a full headphone test fixture with an upright stand, and this time it's an IEC 60318-4 standard compliant rig, which means it's a lot better and more accurate than the original ears. So whatever went into the previous ears was not on this standard. The Ears Pro costs $1,550 by default, but you can add an audio interface to the package, which you will need, and that brings it to $1,800 in total. The stand is fully adjustable, letting you increase or decrease the head size and therefore the clamp pressure for the headphones being tested. This is a super useful feature, and it has these nice carbon fiber rods on the back, and it's actually rather easy to adjust it. The interface provides you everything you need to get started measuring headphones. You just plug it in with USB-C and a power cable, and you should be up and running. Oh, and the interface also has a headphone output, so it's meant to be this all-in-one solution for high-quality headphone measurements, but I personally wouldn't use the headphone output on the interface here because it does have some roll-off. So if you have something else as your headphone output, that would be better. Now, if you've been paying attention to the headphone measurement landscape for the past 5 years, I know you might be thinking, can't I just go to AliExpress and get a full clone rig that's on the same industry standard for like a third of the price? And the answer is yes. Yes, you can. But there are issues. So yes, there are Gross clone rigs available on AliExpress for less money, but there are some important caveats to consider. For starters, you need to actually know the right items to buy for what you're trying to do, and it's not exactly straightforward. For example, do you get the KB5000 or the KB0065? Do you have the right HRTF to actually understand and evaluate the measurements for each of these? Do you already have an ADC for this? What cables and adapters do you need? Do you need a power supply? There are a lot of questions you need to consider before actually making the purchase, but there's a bigger problem. The clone rigs out there have quite a lot of variation. And unfortunately, they don't behave the same as official industry standard equipment. And so when you're reading measurements done from a clone rig of some kind, you can't be nearly as confident in those measurements as you should be in industry standard official measurements. At best, you get somewhere in the ballpark, but it's hard to know for sure, and more importantly, most people making these measurements don't know the extent to which their measurements are lying to them or their audience. Here's an example of a popular clone rig compared to what the same data should look like on an official industry standard rig. You can see that it's off in a couple places. And that's where something like the MiniDSP Ears Pro comes in, or at least ideally. So, over the course of the past week, we've been testing the MiniDSP Ears Pro and comparing it to industry standard equipment, and we've found it to be genuinely very compelling. But first, let's back up a bit. When looking at measurement rigs, you need to broadly consider two parts. One is the pinna, so the fleshy outer ear bit right here. that's being used for the system, and the other is the ear simulator, which is a mic element that basically functions as an ear canal and an eardrum. So that's this piece here. This actually is one of the clone couplers, and this is the clone ear, and I brought these out to kind of show you what they look like, but there are different versions of this. And we also have some official Gross ones along with the MiniDSP Ears Pro one, so we'll be able to compare all of this stuff. For industry standard IEC 60318-4 couplers, the most commonly used ones are the Gross RA0045 or B&K type 4195. This is what the clone rigs are typically based on. And then there's also the newer RA0402 coupler, which is more highly damped for specific resonances. These will show similar results, but things will still look slightly different, particularly in the treble, depending on which coupler is being used. But importantly, these are all built to the same IEC 60318-4 standard, which defines a specific ear load between 100 Hz and 10 kHz. So another way to think about this is that these couplers replicate the human ear as defined by that standard, even though there are some differences among them. When it comes to the ear simulator, that's again this bit right here, and I'm just unscrewing it from the base. You can see that's this here. I can say with a certain amount of confidence that the MiniDSP Ears Pro is actually rather good, and it's better and more reliable than what you get with typical clone couplers. And this means that when you're measuring in-ear headphones like these ones here, you can do so with more confidence on the Ears Pro than you can on any system that uses these AliExpress clones. So that's one advantage of this new system. And this is also important for anybody who's looking at data from the myriad of reviewers using clone coupler equipment, how that compares to the Ears Pro and how that compares to the official systems. These are all things to be mindful of. However, things get a bit more complicated for the pinna, the ear flangey bit right here. So the outer ears of measurement rigs like this one are dictated by a different standard. That's the IEC 60318-7, which is for building full mannequin heads equipped with outer ears for measuring head-worn audio devices like headphones. Official Gross ears that comply with this standard also come in a variety of flavors, but the most popular one is known as the KB5000, which is an important piece to remember since that's the ear that we've characterized in a diffuse field. So we understand how that ear impacts incoming sound better than all of the other ones. This means we know what sort of filtering this ear usually brings to the table, and therefore we can compare the behavior of the headphone to the sound this ear would typically expect, or the brain of the person using an ear like this. You get what I mean. Then there's also the KB5010, which is an ear with the same geometry as the KB5000, just with a different base to fit with a specific upright fixture. And so you'll see this with a fixture like the Gross 45cc. So this KB5010 is what the current best available AliExpress clones are trying to emulate. And that's also what the Ears Pro seems to be based on. Confused? God, I hope so. I'm just saying things and you're just hearing them at this point. But the big question is, how close does the new Ears Pro get? And the answer is that it's still not identical to an official industry standard Gross rig. But it is close, and it seems to be closer than the clone rigs. And that's a good thing. The ear geometry visually seems to be mostly the same, and for most of the ear, the shore hardness, so how stiff or how flaccid the ear is also quite similar. But when you look closely at the ear, you can see that the manufacturing process is a bit different. And there's a seam running along the edges of the Ears Pro, but there isn't on the official Gross ears. Also, for whatever reason, the canal entrance feels a little bit different between the two. So like when I'm inserting an IEM into the measurement fixture, that feels a little bit different on each rig. So what do measurements done on this system look like? Well, here you can see how a variety of headphones measure on the Ears Pro compared to our official Gross 43AG-7, which uses the KB5000 ear that has the same geometry and is functionally identical to the KB5010 and our RA0402 coupler. Again, this is just, I realize I'm just saying letters and numbers at you at this point. That's what these videos are. This is how you know you're doing it right. Now, you can see there are a number of differences going on here. Some of these differences are going to be down to a difference in the ear simulator, and some will be down to differences in the pinna. But conveniently, we're able to swap the coupler from the 43AG into the Ears Pro, isolating differences to just pinna effects, and this is the result that we get. It's like pinna and canal entrance, but you can just think of it as the pinna differences. So again, there are still some differences here. Differences that matter, but it's definitely good enough to be usable. And once again, keep in mind the 43AG has the rectangular base for the pinna, not the rounded off base of the 45cc, which is the fixture that this most closely resembles. So what we don't know is if that's having any effect. Now, when it comes to actually using this device, what's the takeaway? Can you use it with Harman? That's what everybody wants to know. And the answer is you shouldn't have been using official Gross rigs with Harman in the first place, because that research didn't use any commercially available pinup. So let me say that again. If you're using any official Gross ear with the Harman target, don't do that. And this is something that we also got wrong many years ago when we were using the Harman target, but so did everybody else, and there are many who continue to use it. And the problem here is that people didn't realize that headphone behavior changes depending on the ear that you place into the system. So what I'm saying here is that because the research used a different ear, the Gross ears that people are measuring headphones on now and comparing against the Harman target are actually not compatible, even though people think it is. So to get the most out of a measurement rig like this, you need the diffuse field head-related transfer function for the ear you're trying to take the measurement on. And that's, once again, so you can subtract the effects the anatomy imparts to the sound to see how the headphones actually perform. And unless you have a Welty modified pinna, you basically need this for all headphone measurement rigs that you're trying to use to make them maximally useful. Now, here's the interesting bit. While we don't have the specific diffuse field head-related transfer function for the Ears Pro pinna, we do have it for the pinna it most closely resembles, that being the KB5000 and versions with its geometry and Shure hardness, so the 5010 falls into that category as well. And while I won't say that you can use this same DF-HRTF for the Ears Pro with the exact level of confidence, for the moment you can at least use a smooth version of this DF-HRTF, since the features seem to trend similarly. And based on this testing that we've done here, we feel confident enough to say that the MiniDSP Ears Pro sits somewhere between the official, incredibly expensive industry standard Gross rigs like the 45cc and the significantly cheaper but also less reliable and less consistent clone rigs in terms of measurement rig hierarchy. So it's not quite as useful as it could be, at least until someone is able to take this ear to a lab to get its DF-HRTF, and maybe there's someone somewhere in Austria who could do something like this at some point. But speaking of Austrians who are into DF-HRTFs, as it happens, our good friend Oratory1990 has been testing the MiniDSP Ears Pro as well. So let's bring him on and see what he has to say about it.
So in short, it's great. It is what the original Ears was supposed to be. Significantly more affordable than, let's say, a Gross system or an APX, but it is actually useful. So it costs, I don't know, like a tenth of a comparable system from industry standard suppliers. And in terms of what it delivers, it is sufficiently close. That is the short version. The long version is the pinna aren't exactly the same, close enough, not exactly the same. I do like, however, that you can actually remove the couplers quite simply, which means that you can calibrate them. Like if you have an SPL calibrator, you can very easily calibrate them, which wasn't possible with the original Ears, which allows you to do measurements for absolute levels. Like you can then test what is the actual sensitivity, how many decibel per volt you actually get. You can then measure distortion at different levels and not just saying this is a level that sounds loud, but knowing that this is exactly 94 dB, which is great for more technical minded people like yourself, like people who do proper reviews. As far as that goes, I think it's great. For professional users, I'm not quite sure if the calibration is stable enough. So that's something that I don't yet know. I don't know how much drift there is in the calibration. So I'm not sure if this is something that can be used in, let's say, wide scale production. But for anyone who has to think about spending $20,000 on a measurement system, it's a no-brainer solution. That's exactly what we would hope it does.
Speaking of the geometry first, the geometry, we're sort of expecting this to be pretty similar to the KP5000 geometry, which for the nerds out there, we do have, the diffuse field HRTF for this, and that's one of the reasons why, for us, the hope is that this is going to be a useful, cheaper entry point. But through testing, it sort of reveals that at the very least, something about the ear is a little bit different from that official Gross one. Your sense of it is that it's close enough. But how do you think people should actually go about making this device useful? If
you're not watching this video and you're just using any compensation curves originally made for the Gross pinna, the error that you're making here is not a big error. It's at worst, it's a dB or two in this range, something like this, which is not a big issue considering that just placing the headphone differently has a much bigger effect than that. That being said, since of course these aren't, like you can see it, these aren't the actual pinna used by Gross, even though they're mechanically compatible, they're not exactly the same. They're manufactured differently. You can tell that the injection mold, the parting lines for the injection molding tool are placed differently. From touching it, it feels like they're not exactly the same material, which is to be expected. It's a different supplier. So I wouldn't expect completely identical performance. So measurements with these technically, I wouldn't call it interchangeable with something you do on a grass system, but close enough for the majority of the frequency range. So in the measurements that you shared with me before, we saw a few differences at around 8K, where the concha resonance, so the resonance that happens inside the concha here, where that was slightly shifted in frequency. It's not a huge issue unless you want to use high spatial resolution. So there is a point to be made about whether you would want to use a smoothed diffuse field compensation curve for this setup or a compensation curve with high spatial resolution. And I would argue that for this setup, you would want to use a more smooth version, in order not to overcompensate for small peaks, which might happen at a slightly different frequency with this setup. To be fair, this point can also be made for any headphone measurement setup, because you're comparing from one pinner to another pinner, as in the pinner that is on your head, which is going to be much more different to the dummy head than this one is. So technically, you should always be using smoothed diffuse field compensation curves.
Yeah, you always have to sort of take any result with a sufficient grain of salt because of HPTF variation, headphone variation across heads anyway.
Exactly.
So one of the things that comes to mind when I see a device like this, for anybody who is for some reason looking to get into becoming a headphone reviewer and doing so with measurements, they have a number of different choices available to them, and they all are at very significantly different price tags. Obviously, the industry standard stuff is ridiculously expensive. So most people, they would either look at the original ears, unfortunately, or what they're doing more recently is they're looking to the AliExpress clone couplers and clone rigs and clone ears and that kind of stuff. Would you rather have, if you were in their shoes, a device like this, the Ears Pro, or one of the good clone systems, like let's say one of the better ones out there?
I would say that for the clone systems that I know, I would say if you can afford it, like if you're looking into production, if you want to build a headphone brand and you plan on producing more than a couple dozen units per year, you're gonna need to look at more professional setups anyway. As in, you're gonna need something like an APX or a listening system, simply because you can integrate those into a production line. You can then automatically upload the data somewhere, do all of the data processing. There's software like the Lyceum, which automatically can take APX files and process that. You cannot do that with REW. So if you're thinking about production line, you will need a different data acquisition system anyway. For reviewers, this is I think what you should do. Like if you're going into reviewing, there is a certain budget that you need to make at the beginning. Like you're gonna want camera, lights, that sort of thing. And I think you should be planning for something like this as well, because in 2026 you can't afford to ignore aspects of a headphone which can be measured. Like you can talk about sound, and that's fine, and you should, but you can't afford to ignore measurable things. Otherwise, we get back into the dark ages, as Sean likes to call it, where we just don't show measurements at all and just pretend like something is fine and don't ever prove it. But if you want to do measurements, then something like the original ears is not the right decision in my opinion, because as I always say, bad data is not always better than no data. And with the MiniDSP ears, you are getting something that looks quite useful, and it looks, if you don't have a lot of experience in this topic, then it looks professional, but it's not that useful because of the acoustic impedance topic and all of that. It is within the standard spec. So this can be used and be called industry standard in terms of it fulfills the IEC standards for this sort of device. And it's definitely useful for that. So yeah, if you are planning to do measurements, this is basically what you should use. If your question is, should you use this as a single device which you buy like this and you get it shipped and that's all you get, or should you try and basically build something like this your own, like buying the pinner, buying the ears, like the ear canal simulators, buying a signal conditioner that's basically a microphone preamp, and then maybe 3D printing a rig where you can place the headphone on and adjust the width. You can do that on your own. You can save maybe a couple bucks. It's not going to save you that much.
Well, there are also like AliExpress fixtures that have that are trying to emulate a 45cc that you could get. I bring this up because I think a lot of people, if they're trying to get into doing YouTube reviews with headphones, they're looking at AliExpress because they only want to spend $500 to $1,000 on a measurement, startup essentially. And the question is really like, how much better is this than that, or is there a reason to go with this other than just the convenience of it being all in one?
So the convenience is something that you cannot ignore, right? Because if it saves yourself 8 hours of time setting this up and verifying that it works versus doing the same in 30 minutes. That's 7.5 hours that you can then spend on, getting your camera to work or getting your microphone to work. Time is valuable, right? And if this saves you time, then that's great value. If, of course, your budget is tight enough for this to be an issue, you can do cheaper things. Like the couplers themselves, I'm pretty sure are the same ones. The slightly better ones, the ones that actually conform to IEC with the half-inch mics. I don't know how closely the clone ones actually come close to a 45cc from Grass with the adjustable angles. This one is freely adjustable. You can adjust the distance with this in the back. Just turn it open, then this slides open. You can adjust the height of that. I'm not sure how much of that is possible with the AliExpress rigs. Of course, like you can say, if you need to save money, you can then just get those and modify them and make your own parts for that. But then again, we're at a time issue. So how much time are you willing to spend versus do you just want to get something that works, works, and just get started and spend all of that time actually doing measurements, understanding measurements, because that takes a lot of time as well.
I guess my last question for you here is, in the context of folks using now 4.3 standard-based systems like 4620 from B&K and 5128, the more, let's say, acoustic impedance sensitive devices, and also now what we're doing with on-head measurements, if you're going to spend a bunch of money to get into reviewing, does it make sense to do so with the older standard? My answer to this is still yes, absolutely.
Unequivocally, yes, absolutely. Like the type 4.3 ear simulator does not invalidate all the results we got with type 3.3 ear simulators like this is. So that's a type 3.3 simulator. The results of this are still exactly as accurate and as valid as they were 10 years ago. In addition to that, the type 4.3 ear simulator is quite useful, specifically for in-ear headphones. It's not the solution to all the issues. You still need a lot of context when looking at those measurements. Like the issue that we have with measuring over-ear headphones on it, where the pinner adds resonances which aren't there on humans, which we can see if we measure headphones on humans and measure it on the 4.3 fixture. If we take an average across multiple humans, the 4.3 ear deviates from the human average more so than the type 3.3 ear for certain over-ear headphones. It's not as if the 4.3 ear simulator was a solution for everything and we would never have to look at anything else ever again. Unfortunately, that's simply not the case. This much has been pretty clear in the past few years where we've been looking into that. It's very useful, but it doesn't solve every issue that we have. Should you buy one if you get into reviewing? Well, it's like 30 grand or 70 grand for the big head. So no, you can spend your money much better than that. Even just getting the ear itself, like a single eardrum, ear canal and pinner, if you just want to measure in-ear headphones, that's like 10 grand as well. So money is much better spent on other things.
One of the things that is interesting to me about this, even though it's very similar geometrically to the KB5000 ear, which we have the DF-HRTF characterized for already, the idea of a different ear that could potentially be widely available, lower barrier to entry for good headphone measurements. If there's an opportunity to place this Ears Pro ear into a Kemar fixture and get its DF-HRTF, is that something that you'd be interested in doing?
Yeah, so that's something that I'm going to suggest to MiniDSPs. Of course, these exact ears are not mechanically compatible with Kemar, so we cannot use these. They'd have to be modified in a way that's not changing the acoustics, but just to physically connect it against the way that pinners are mounted to the Kemar, which the screws are in a different position, so that would have to be adapted. But that's like you make a drawing and you do one print of the ears, and they do not have to be flexible for an HRTF measurement, so you can print them out of whatever resin you have. So that's something that certainly can be done, and that's something that most certainly gives you a more accurate diffuse field compensation curve. The question is how different it will be to the one that we already have for the KB5000 or 5010. I suspect there will be differences above 8K. How big they are, we cannot see at this point. Measuring that would be interesting. Yeah, are you up for that? Let's do that.
MiniDSP, let's make it happen. What's cool about this device, and I've said it sort of throughout this video as well, is that it's a lower barrier to entry for high quality headphone measurements. And as the rest of us who are doing this, one of the biggest frustrations for us is always like the amount of data noise that we get as a function of things like the original MiniDSP ears and some of the clone rigs that are out of spec or they're used incorrectly, or there's all of that. And so with something like this, like there's this possibility that the overall quality of measurements at a more accessible price point could get significantly better. And that's why I'm fired up for this.
Yeah, absolutely. I was really excited to see the announcement from MiniDSPs, and it really looked like they've implemented all the feedback that they got. Like the original fixture was a great idea, just not well executed, and I'm certain they got a lot of feedback on what could be improved. Like I was very vocal about what would need to be changed about that. Was very public with that, and they've implemented basically everything. So I have no points of critique with this. That's good.
Where can folks find you? And you're going to do a post on this as well, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna post on this, of course, on Reddit. I'm probably also gonna write something on Headphone, maybe audio science review as well. We'll see.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Now, before anybody goes out and buys one of these things, I want to caution you that this system is still on the older standard. That's fine, but it's not going to be as accurate for acoustic impedance sensitive devices as the 4.3 standard based systems like the B&K 5128 or the 4620. And headphones, even open-back headphones, are going to be susceptible to this inaccuracy. But that doesn't mean this new Ears Pro is not useful, given the totality of measurement data that exists from 711-based systems, and how that represents a massive base of internally comparable data. And I just have to say that it's nice that they were able to put this into a complete package that's easy to use. So yes, it's meaningfully more expensive than the AliExpress options, but it also seems to be more accurate to the standard and more reliable. And more importantly, it's leaps and bounds better than the original Ears. So good job, MiniDSP. If for some reason you felt this bizarre urge to become a headphone reviewer and you want to do so responsibly with measurements, this wouldn't be a bad place to start. And with that, that's going to do it for this video. As always, if you want to chat with me, you can do so at our forum at forum.headphones.com, or you can connect with me in our Discord, also linked below. Until next time, I'll see you guys later. Bye for now.